Good afternoon, everybody, those within the auditorium here in UCD and those who are joining us online. You're very welcome to this event in the IUA Future of Ireland series. My name is Orla Feely. I'm UCD Vice President for Research, Innovation and Impact, and I'm going to be your MC and panel chair today. So we're delighted that you could join us for this hybrid event. We've a wonderful and large audience from academia, from industry, from government and from other organisations, and again we're delighted to have you. For those of you who are joining online, we have closed captioning available, and you can alter the size of these captions by clicking on the CC button on the top of your screen. If you want to tweet, the hashtag is #IUA Future of Ireland. So it's a really interesting time to be having this discussion, and I'm delighted to be able that we're able to host this event here in UCD today. Our keynote speaker is Professor Philip Nolan. I'll introduce Philip in a couple of moments, but I suspect no introduction is necessary because I suspect we all know who Philip is. We'll also be joined in a moment by Professor Mark Rogers, the acting president here in UCD, and our panellists, Professor Nora Lee Kennedy of the University of Limerick, Kevin Burke of Enterprise Ireland, and Rebecca Braun of NUI Galway. So I'll now hand over to my colleague, Professor Mark Rogers, who will give us the introduction, who's, as well as being acting president of UCD, Mark is chair of the IUA. So Mark, thank you.
Thanks very much, Orla. I'm delighted to be able to just give this brief introduction. So today's webinar is the first in-person Future of Ireland event for research and innovation in many years. And it's wonderful to see so many colleagues and members of the research community here today and joining us online. We have over 90 organisations represented today and over 340 attendees registered, with people joining us from across Ireland and across the globe. We're delighted to have such a large cohort from our higher education institutions, government departments, semi-state agencies, the charity sector and members of the Oireachtas and Seanad. Today's event will build on a very successful series which has seen many issues of public interest being discussed and debated. I'm delighted to be opening this event on writing the next chapter for research and innovation in Ireland. This decade in Irish history is proving transformative for higher education research and innovation, with the formation of the new government department bringing higher education together with research and innovation for the first time with its own minister at the cabinet table, the launch of Horizon Europe, the opportunities presented in the Funding the Future framework and the ambitions set out in Impact 2030, we are now at a pivotal point. Today's event will focus on how we can work together to enhance our research and innovation system to be the best it can be and support a truly knowledge-based economy and society. Ireland's future as a flourishing small nation on the edge of Europe is underpinned by the talent and creativity of its people. Our universities have a unique role in fostering and supporting a shared vision for a fair, vibrant, culturally rich society based on democratic values that is underpinned by a thriving, sustainable economy. Research is a core part of the Irish higher education system and the defining characteristic of a university, contributing to curriculum development, teaching quality, and a student's exposure to the world of research. Through their research activities, our universities create and apply new nodes of knowledge that address real-life problems in the context of sustainable economic and societal model. This point in time gives us an opportunity like never before to ensure that we have world-class higher education and research and innovation that delivers lasting impact for the people of Ireland. We were delighted to see the publication last month of Funding the Future, the government's funding and reform framework for higher education, which recognises Ireland's higher education system as a core element of strategic national infrastructure. Funding the Future identifies a core funding deficit of 307 million and identifies staffing shortages as a key barrier to quality and growth. The university sector stands ready to work in partnership with government to deliver the ambitious reform agenda and a fit-for-purpose, unified and high-performing education, research and training system. Last month also saw the publication of Impact 2030, the new National Strategy for Research and Innovation, accompanied with an ambitious work programme for 2022 to 2024. There are many stakeholders involved in this transformative work, and the new governance structures proposed are welcomed by the sector. Today, this event aims to give voice to a few perspectives, and we hope this discussion provides great food for thought as we travel this journey together. We're delighted that today we are joined by Professor Philip Nolan, who will give us an insight to his thinking on this, considering the distance we've traveled as a nation and a view of our future destination. And I'd like to take this opportunity to also welcome our panelists, and I look forward to the insightful discussion that lays ahead. I have no doubt that together we can develop approaches that will enable researchers across our higher education system to contribute significantly to expanding new knowledge, to advance society, and to address the major societal challenges we face through collaboration and partnership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Now, as you will know, the IUA Future of Ireland series is always centred around a keynote address, many of which have been very, very influential in recent developments in our national system of research and innovation. I'm particularly thinking of the address from Micheál Martin, now of course on Taoiseach. This is before he became Taoiseach, talking about his view of higher education and research, really setting out a number of the ideas that led to the formation of the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science. So these are important events, and thank you very much to Lisa Keating, to Lee, and to all in the IUA who organised them. So our keynote speaker today, then, following that esteemed tradition, is, again, as I said, somebody who needs no introduction, Professor Philip Nolan, and we're delighted to have Philip join us so early in his tenure as Director General of Science Foundation Ireland. As you will all know, prior to holding that role, Philip has been President of Maynooth University from 2011 to 2021, where he oversaw unprecedented growth in the diversification of teaching and research and the doubling of the research capacity of that university. Prior to that, Philip was very well known to us here in UCD, where he was Registrar and Deputy President from 2004 to 2011. And of course, Philip was very well known to everybody in the country in 2020 and 2021 for his role on NEFIT, the National Public Health Emergency Team, and as Chair of the National Epidemiological Modelling Group. So Philip, I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, Aura. Thanks for that kind introduction. I'm really delighted to be here. So I'm not going to give you a detailed exposition of the new national strategy for research and innovation. I can assure you I've read it in detail, but I don't particularly view this as a tutorial on the matter. Orla was kind enough to mention my time at Maynooth University. I think you're going to see Maynooth's fingerprints or my experience over 10 years there written into this presentation because it gave me an exposure, I think, to what Newman called, you know, the university, the interplay of ideas from all disciplines. And also, I'm going to use my experience and my very personal experience of the pandemic as an illustration of, I think, my fundamental point here. And my fundamental point here is the new national strategy makes a very strong case for investment in research and scholarship across all disciplines. And it sees the challenges of the future as requiring the reflections and inputs and expertise collectively of all disciplines for us to make any kind of progress as a species and as an ecosystem. And I simply want to reflect on that. I want to reflect on the why of the value of all of these disciplines and how it feeds in to the strategy. So it's a kind of prior reflection on why these things matter, because it gives you, I think, an indication of how I, as one leader within a very large system, intends to embody a strategy which, as Mark has said, is welcome, visionary, appropriate, and now needs to be implemented with full vigor and full spirit. So I want to, in this hopefully short talk, talk about how far we've come. I think it's really important to recognize the fruits of the investment that has been made over the last 20 years. I want to talk about some lessons from the pandemic, and I mean rather deep lessons from the pandemic about why research and scholarship matter to us as a society. I want to talk briefly about the opportunity of Impact 2030 and how it's necessary for us to seize it. And then we talk about ecosystems all the time. So if I have time, I want to just reflect for a minute on the usefulness and meaning of the ecosystem analogy. So how far have we come? And just for me personally, my first scientific paper was published in 1990. In fact, I can see from the window of my 5th floor office in Hatch Street, under the IDA, I hasten to add, the literally Victorian laboratory in Ersford Terrace, where we cobbled together the equipment and built some of our own to do the work. We did have in this country at that time a significant number of outstanding scholars of international repute across a wide range of disciplines. And you can trace many of the current strengths within our research system to these pioneers. But in truth, our capacity to do research consistently at scale with global relevance and connectedness was very limited. What do we have now? We have a mature research and innovation ecosystem, one of which we can be proud and one which can stand alongside its peers internationally. We have strong higher education institutions and research performing organizations. We have professionalized state agencies, such as the one that I run, each with their strengths and culture, but each of them making a really significant difference to the landscape. And we have something which is kind of peculiar to our system, which is agility and a capacity for innovation. We can do things quickly and innovatively and well. It's got something to do with power distance relationships within the country, but we can move things on quicker than many of our counterparts globally. We had a step change in investment. We all remember it. A step change of investment between 2000 and 2007. And it was relatively well preserved during the recession. It's important to acknowledge that, particularly important to acknowledge the role of my predecessor and all who supported him in government in preserving that investment. And we have something again, which is not quite particular to our ecosystem, but very important within it, a very strong enterprise connection and a relatively efficient, very efficient, in fact, innovation system. And so it's important in particular that that latter strength is leveraged and continues. And when we look at the level of investment, when I was working on that paper, we were spending about 30 million euro in the higher education system per annum in research. That's now crept over 1 billion. And of course, our GDP is inflated by lots of things. So if we look at it against GNI or GNI star, we've gone from, in the 1980s, spending about 0.1% of GNI star, a kind of slow incremental investment through the 80s into the 90s. And then you can see the turning point at the turn of the millennium with PRTLI, the foundation of SFI investment in research. And we went from about 0.3 to a little over 0.5 of GNI star at that point being invested. And yes, the recession hit us. It declined, investment in real terms declined, but as I say, relatively well preserved due to the recession. The recent uptick is partly due to the economic contraction of 2020, as well as additional investment. And if we look at how we're performing internationally, as I say, it's a bit unfair, in fairness to our government, to look at percentage of GDP because GDP is inflated. That's the dark green bar. If we look at the light green bar, which is the percentage of GNI star, well, we're about average. We're above the OECD average and slightly behind the EU 27 average. And you can see the big spenders, which are the highly innovative and in particular small, highly innovative economies on the right-hand side that are spending north of 0.7% of their GDP on research in the higher education system. I think all of this put together, particularly when you look back at the impact of the step change in the early 2000s, that us sitting around 0.5% of GNI star at the moment puts a case that if we want to achieve the ambition in the strategy, we should be looking at around 0.7% of GNI star into the long term invested. So first of all, we have come a long way. And the important thing to do is build on the achievements of the last 20 years and learn the lesson of the impact of the ambition of the early 2000s and where the impact of the early 2000s left us during the recession as an entity that could absorb like the single biggest economic shock in Europe and now be looking to 2030 with real ambition. So what about lessons from the pandemic? I have to say, the first lesson from the pandemic, for me, the first thing that struck me as a working scientist kind of drafted in as a foot soldier, was that science worked. It's quite extraordinary to think, like, the first case presented, I estimate, on the 17th of December 2019, that's going back to the original case reports, the genome was sequenced 25 days later. You know, for anybody who was in biological sciences in the 1980s and 1990s, that's extraordinary. And it was 370 days after the first person presented to A&E in Wuhan that the first vaccine trial was reported. That's just stunning. And it has stunned the public in the same way as it stuns us. The second thing, of course, was that in this country we had no capacity to model what was about to happen next. So I got a phone call at 8:30 on a Sunday morning from the chief medical officer who said, is there anybody in the country who can model the spread of infectious disease in the population? I said I didn't think so. But in a phone around over the subsequent couple of days, we managed to find extraordinary talent. And the thing that struck me immediately after that, that talent was there because we had invested in that talent over decades. We hadn't invested in it to respond to a pandemic, we had invested in it for other reasons. And some of the talent we had underinvested upon, but we could call upon it. And you're familiar with the models. The top left there is from James Gleeson in Limerick, the bottom left is from Jim Duggan in Galway. And the important thing about this is, first of all, there was that talent in applied mathematics and statistics, biostatistics, geospatial science, in veterinary epidemiology, which I'll come back to. Human epidemiologists have moved on to non-communicable diseases. Veterinary epidemiologists still care about infections and communicable diseases. These people were largely funded to do other things. Some of them were inadequately funded. In other words, society hadn't seen the need for these people until we saw the need for these people. And I have to say, what they did here was engaged research. They employed their talent with colleagues in public health, a relatively undervalued profession, I have to say. What is your problem? How can we fix it together? And we heard very little about them because they weren't necessarily publishing papers in Nature. They were doing a job that had to be done at the time. Interestingly, the paper on the right, which includes somebody I have to pay tribute to from here, Brendan Murphy in Maths and Stats here, was an unusual kind of fundamental spin-out. They did all of this engaged research and found that they came up with a really elegant solution to a complex problem in terms of modelling, and they published it. So I think engaged research was vitally important to this, and one of the things that these colleagues have said to me is that neither their funders nor their institution fully understood how to fund, recognise and reward genuinely engaged research, and there is a lesson in that for us. And the other lesson is when you have a mission, there's something terribly unifying about a mission and a challenge. I just want to, in passing, pay tribute. These are a set of papers from Simon Moore's group, the UCD Centre for Veterinary Epidemiology and Risk Analysis. Simon, he won't be troubled for me to say, has at times found it hard to be funded. And yet when we needed him, he was there, and we need to remember that. And I just want to pay tribute to him. The other thing that I have to say is that was the first lesson, the importance of the talent base. The second lesson was the challenge of translating this knowledge, or our models, or whatever it is, into policy and some kind of healthy behavioural response. That turned out to be, we hugely underestimated that as a challenge, and we didn't, I think, appropriately or fully at all times consider the social and human impact of what had to be done in order to control infection. So I'm just giving you a set of papers that have been published from across our system by, again, people that were funded, largely by the IRC in this case, on children inequality, psychological distress, deprivation, infection, and vaccine hesitancy. Again, there was this huge talent base in the country who got to work on the problem and began to educate us as public health leaders about how to draw in the capacities of the social and human sciences. That was the kind of second learning. And the third learning, frankly, is where are we now? We're in a very strange space. We're emerging traumatized from a global pandemic, the impact of which was at the outer limits of our imagination. emerging into a period of proximate war and geopolitical instability. And I think our recent experience has brought the climate and ecological crisis into very sharp focus, not simply because the instrumental link between biodiversity loss and the emergence of new viral threats, but simply put, given how we have struggled to adapt and manage a global pandemic, we feel frightened and unprepared to confront the bigger, more complex and more destructive challenges of climate and biodiversity loss. This image by Elizabeth Maza from her graduation show at the National College of Art and Design, which I saw for the first time on Tuesday evening, had a profound effect on me. Entitled Empty Tank, it captures that sense of exhaustion, running on empty, that many of us feel, and you can actually, I clearly feel it, many of us feel at this juncture. The figure reminds me that our trauma, individual and collective, is embodied and distorting, as you can see in the figure. We're in some intermediate space here, on the road between where we're coming from and where we literally must go. And the installation, this is how it appeared in the exhibition, the installation extends that metaphor to one of shock, being jump-started, being reanimated, being defibrillated, if you will. The image sets up its own tension or disjuncture between technology, humanity, and ecology. And then the more you look at it, there's something kind of sinister, brutal, tortured about these clamps and these cables, and then as you look into it, into the image itself. So my point is twofold. First, it's only through art, literature, music, drama, the humanities in general, that certainly I can, and I suspect we can, fully explore and come to terms with the fundamental challenges of the human condition as we are experiencing them now, or in fact as they were ever experienced. And with all due respect to the sociological imaginary, which I do very much respect, it's through these disciplines and practices that we can fully imagine how and why we want to live. And then second, collectively and as a society, we're feeling this sense of exhaustion, trauma, dislocation, concern, and guilt that makes us fearful for our future. And interestingly for me, this is reflected in the public and political mind. This is how people are. They're worried and they're concerned. And it's feeding into, when I read the strategy, I feel this sense of what is the future we want and how is research and innovation going to secure us that future. So it's influenced our research and innovation policy. And very clearly for me, it hasn't been launched yet, so I can't talk about it, but the Creating Our Future public consultation process absolutely captured that. It captures precisely what the public want from our research system to holistically address the grand challenges that face us as a society, and the political mind reflects this. It's instructive, actually, and it happened in the course of the pandemic, to have the political system become angry and frustrated with you, because they're simply expressing the frustration and anger of the people that they represent. And I don't think I'm overreading it into the strategy. So what are the lessons for the pandemic? The value of research talent. You really can't anticipate what research talent you're going to need and when you're going to need it. So broad investment in research talent across all disciplines is essential. The importance for us of collaboration and interdisciplinarity, and we didn't do enough of it. The importance of a mission, a purpose, an objective, and the value of engaged research in the service of society. It also taught us, I think, the challenge of translating knowledge into policy, healthy behaviours, and inclusive progress. And I think it really reinforced for us. We saw this thing happen, and it really does feel for me like a rehearsal for the grander challenge, the connectedness of ecology, humanity, society, and economy. And so I have a hypothesis. My hypothesis is that the public and political support for research and scholarship is exceptionally high. People have become focused on the transformative power of holistic research. And the grand challenges are people's core concern. What are we going to do about the climate and biodiversity crisis? How is digitalization and technology going to transform how we live and the meaning of being human? And how do we live and age equitably, inclusively, and well? And then my observation is, look at what has just happened. As Mark very eloquently put it, the state has planned the largest and most strategically thought through investment in higher education and research since the turn of this century. So quickly, because I think I've set the stage, what is the opportunity of Impact 2030? Over the last 20 years, I've opened government strategies many times. Sometimes I'm underwhelmed, sometimes I'm impressed, and I genuinely have to say I'm impressed on this occasion. What might we have hoped for? We might have hoped for a strategy that would fund research talent across all disciplines and career stages. We might have hoped for a strategy that talked about diversity and inclusion. We might have hoped for a strategy that talked about ecological, social, and economic gain, preserving that but adding the other two. That talks about strong enterprise, public service, and civil society partnerships, that focuses on the challenges, takes an international outlook, and invests in the simplest possible way. And we have a strategy that does. So the vision is quite compelling. It talks about society, the economy, and environment. It talks about a clear and simple architecture and institutional landscape. It focuses on enterprise and extending the connection to SMEs. It talks about research talent at all career stages, and that is going to be a big challenge for us to do that well. It talks about a shared island and an innovative Europe and strengthens the North-South European and global connections. And it sets a target for innovation. We have to unpack that target, I think, and we have to make sure we achieve it. But it does propose significant investment over the course of the next decade. And it's usually worthwhile reading the Minister's opening statement. It's often a very good summary of the intent of the strategy. And again, look at this. Strengthening and supporting right across the system, HEIs, enterprises, public service, and civil society. We may come back to this in the Q&A, placing all research areas on an equal and statutory footing. So there's a sense of the importance of all the disciplines and interdisciplinary work, increasing and deepening enterprise research and innovation activity, and prioritises inclusive nurturing of development of talent and excellence. Is a whole of government strategy, bringing together in particular the 5 main spending departments, and the pillars align very well with the vision. But what I want to emphasize to you is the vision. This vision is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to shape in the implementation a strategy through which we can achieve very significant things. I'm going to stop on that point because for us, I think now the challenge is to make this work. And the challenges for me, and there are many, I could list 20, but the ones that I'm most focused on at the moment are, we now need to make the case. We need to confidently make the case for increased and sustained investment in fundamental research in all discipline areas. We do need to strengthen and extend the enterprise connection, particularly to SMEs that we've been so good at. We need to understand how to fund and reward, and understand the value and how to fund and reward engaged in interdisciplinary research. If we are going to further invest in research, we need to think about what is the career structure for those researchers over the full arc of their careers, and what are we doing to make sure the doctoral experience is optimized as a training for many possible outcomes. There's a proposal for one agency. The thing to do is to do that right, carrying forward the best of the culture and practices of our current funders. And the really important thing is there's a whole of government ambition here. That requires a huge amount of discussion and dialogue and alignment across a range of state agencies and a range of government departments to common ends. So it's easy to write, but it's hard to do. And we really need to commit to facing those challenges. In the interest of time, I'm going to stop there and hand over for the broader panel discussion. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Philip. So Philip is now joining our panel, along with the other panellists, Professor Rebecca Braun, who's Executive Dean of the College of Arts, Social Sciences and Celtic Studies at NUI Galway, Kevin Burke, who's the National Director for Horizon Europe at Enterprise Ireland, and Professor Nora Lee Kennedy, who's the Vice President for Research at the University of Limerick and a physiotherapist by background. So many of you, when you were registering, submitted questions. Thank you for those. Whether you did or you didn't, you can still ask questions today. You can put them in online, and we have Lisa Keating in the front row here of the IUA who's going to be looking at those questions, and then when I've put my few questions, we listen to those ones. And then also those of you in the auditorium as well, we'd love to get questions from you. But first of all, let me get the ball rolling here. And Philip, I'll start with you. So of those questions that people submitted when registering, there were two that came up by far the most frequently. And one of them was the plan in Impact 2030 for the amalgamation of the functions and activities of SFI and the IRC into a new agency. Now, what do you think could be the benefits for Ireland of such an amalgamation, and what are the dangers that we need to guard against?
Okay, I'll be brief, I think.
Yeah.
So I think the important thing here is the intent, that equal, first of all, and statutory, second of all. You can see that I and many people I work with are genuinely passionate about the value of all disciplines and the value of interdisciplinarity. But I think this gives us an opportunity to institutionalize that. You can't depend on any champion or advocate or structure. There's a job to be done here in the legislation and governance to institutionalize a clear ambition that we would invest broadly and appropriately in all disciplines because of the value that all of those disciplines bring. So I think it gives us the opportunity to explicitly set the balance between fundamental and applied research, between research across different disciplines. I think both entities that we were working with here have learned different things over the course of the last 20 years. Both entities bring different practices and values and culture to the table. So I think for this to be optimized, there has to be a position where the two entities sit together and say, what do we have to learn from each other to optimize the future? I think it can facilitate genuine interdisciplinarity and also kind of shifts in balance over time. That currently would require kind of a high level of coordination between the agencies. One agency, I think, can have considerable influence. But at the same time, you need to make sure then that influence is. To kind of cut to the dangers, and there's arguments about simplicity as well. One national funding agency can kind of assert the value of research in a way that when it's spread more widely, it can be more difficult to do. But I think the danger is that the value of something would be lost, or you would lose sight of the kind of core values which the strategy articulates and I've just articulated. So I think the necessity there is to ensure that those values, what we value as a society and what we think should be invested in as a society, is somehow institutionalized, as I say, through legislation, through governance and so on, to prevent some kind of drift or capture. I think we have to be alert to that danger and we have to confront that danger.
Thanks for that, Philip. And Rebecca, I might put the same question to you because I think you've an interesting perspective here. You've recently returned to Ireland from the UK, so you've seen the evolution of agencies there with the formation of UK-RI. You're also a researcher from the Arts, Humanities, Social Sciences, an area that has particular interest and maybe sensitivity in what might emerge through an amalgamation of the functions of the IRC with those of SFI. So what are your thoughts on this, both what we might gain from such an amalgamation and also what we need to be careful about?
Yeah, thanks. I guess you could kind of sum up the opportunities and the challenges in the idea of being seen. So, my experience in the UK, and I was there, I kind of had all of my academic career from an undergraduate degree right through to, well, the last till 18 months ago, so I kind of saw the individual research councils being individual research councils for a large part of that, and then more recently merging in the form of UK-RI. I think I found that actually hugely positive. I found it hugely positive because there was a sense to me, and my expertise is specifically in literature and languages, there was a sense that, we were getting ever more siloed into doing quite niche things, and the kind of the money that was available to do it was getting ever smaller. So something had to happen within the system. And I thought it was hugely positive when those 7 councils in the UK were brought into under the umbrella of UK-RI. That in itself isn't exciting from a researcher's point of view. But what happened next was exciting because they retained, so the AHRC remains from an arts and humanities perspective, and the SRC for the social sciences, but they really started to work together. And it was clear that while there was money still going to the individual, kind of ring fence for the individual councils, there was also a significantly larger pot of money being made available for collaboration. So precisely what you were talking about, Philip, in the opportunities here. And that was just really helpful for people who wanted to think about their research in a different way and have it seen in a different way. What was important, I think, in starting to make that work really well is that when schemes were launched and, UK&R&I says we want a whole knowledge sector approach to solving these problems, they really worked hard on convincing all of the different kinds of researchers that what the expertise that they had would be relevant, it would count, and it would be seen, on its own terms, this idea of an equal footing. So really careful messaging around what it is we're trying to achieve by having the different disciplines work together. And I think that's produced some really interesting opportunities for people right across the arts, humanities, and social sciences in the UK. And from a research perspective, I would still very happily be in that landscape, because I do think it's a chance for you to showcase what arts and humanities contribute to society. And I guess thinking about, why do the arts, humanities, and social sciences, but particularly the arts and humanities, why do they feel that they're not seen? Because, of course, that's the thing, isn't it? The worry is always, we won't be seen, we'll just be tagged on, you won't appreciate what we're doing, you'll just ask us to make a play at the end and showcase your scientific research. And, and then people get kind of, justifiably annoyed about that. This idea that, arts and humanities are sort of in crisis and not appreciated and underfunded and undervalued, it's endemic in all countries I have any significant knowledge of, in Europe, in the UK, and here in Ireland as well. And America. And why does that happen? And I was thinking, well, actually, there's something really odd going on, because the arts and humanities are everywhere. They're too big. So they're too big for people to see them. If you think about, how do we educate our children? We send them through primary and secondary education, which is really predominantly arts and humanities and social sciences. It's the values, it's what people care about, it's the heritage, it's the thousands of years of learning and knowledge. It's all around us, it's in the buildings that we inhabit, it's in, it's just everywhere in the fabric of society, it's in our general activities that we like to do. So there's something kind of interesting about the fact that the arts and humanities are everywhere, obviously really valued by society. But when we come to formulating what's important in a university and what kind of research should we be doing, that's kind of too big to get a handle on. So we do something that universities are very good at. We get masochistic and we say, let's take the thing that we're really good at and we'll disqualify that. So what we're really good at in universities as a whole, and this goes across the arts, humanities and sciences, is teaching, it's educating, it's getting the sense of what's the knowledge that we hold, what are the values that we stand for. It's the universities that hold those. And we find a way of communicating that, thinking again and again what's important to us, what building blocks can we draw on, how can we connect what we know, and keep a conversation going across society that is important and urgent for our times. And that happens in science just as much as it does in the arts and humanities. But we do that first and foremost with our students, and we do it excellently. And somehow we manage to call that not research. And yet that is research. That's the building blocks of helping all of society have the tools to be able to put together imaginative solutions for where we want to go as a society, what's important to us. So I suppose, I'm going to stop talking in a minute because it feels like I've been going on for a long time. I'm getting quite impassioned. To come back to where are the challenges, it's to do with how we're defining research. I think we're a bit too quick to go, there's the teaching bit and there's the research bit, and we're talking about research and we're talking about money, and because we're talking about money, we have to talk about jobs and impact in those kinds of terms. But we're making life really hard for ourselves. We're running the danger of overlooking the talent. And you thought very well, Philip, about the talent that we discovered we had, which we hadn't really been paying much attention to. So I think there's a danger that we get too focused on trying to define quite a narrow understanding of research. and leave out the really, really obvious thing that universities do, and which does require a large amount of funding too, and that is the teaching. So I think we could think a little bit more imaginatively about how, you know, SFI and IRC are coming together on a mission, but it's a bigger mission than just a very specific form of research. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. And Norley, I might then follow on from that one. Because the question of research funding that we're talking about here, and obviously Impact 2030, telling us all about that. Then there's also the question of the funding of higher education, and we've recently had the big announcement on that from government as well. So it does seem, and Rebecca has, I think, put very well there, how there is this absolute interplay between research and teaching within our higher education system. So if we're looking just at the funding of them, and you might want to talk more broadly than that, but it, you know, we need to join up our consideration, and these two big recent announcements and having these two in the same department as well gives us a real opportunity. So what can we gain nationally? What do we need to do for a joined up consideration of the funding and the strength of our higher education system and our research system?
Yeah, no, thanks, Orla. And I think listening to Rebecca speak so passionately, I think it brings to the fore a number of things. You know, before I come to your specific question, the piece about what we value in a system, and then the use of language and how language can very much include or exclude. And I think, you know, what Impact 2030 really presents is a real opportunity. And Philip has picked up on a lot of this. I won't labour the points, but to really look at the next decade and the opportunities that present for us to look at the joined up connectivity in the system. I think that's a really exciting opportunity. And I think sometimes conversations about what's funded, what isn't funded, what should be funded, can become very polarised. So I think the opportunity now is to actually, you know, acknowledge the maturity in the system that Philip referred to earlier, and to look at the connectivity between both sides of our houses, so to speak, when we're in a higher education system, and acknowledging what has to happen in the system to adequately support really good disciplines at the core of our research. And that's going to be fundamentally important. So, you know, acknowledging that that's the foundational point of starting. And, you know, that latent talent that you acknowledged that was there, that we didn't know was there, making sure that that will always be there is quite important. So not again, you know, trying to remove the choices in the system, so to speak, as much as we possibly can. So I suppose one way of looking at thinking about that is to think a little bit about not just adding more competitive funding only into the system. You know, that's one part of the consideration. But when we do look at competitive funding into the system, how can that system absorb that additional funding? And there's some real considerations of that. For example, you know, what's the capacity of our academics, for example, to do more research when there's more funding available? What's the capacity of our infrastructure in the system to be able to, I suppose, respond to that? And to talk a little bit about infrastructure for a moment, what I mean by infrastructure is, you know, one part of that is equipment, and not only large pieces of equipment, it's the bread and butter equipment as many of us use, but it's also digital archives, it's the collections in the system, it's our library systems. It's our physical infrastructure. What are our, you know, we're in a beautiful building here today, but it's not all like this everywhere in all of our universities. And we have to acknowledge that, and we have to acknowledge that the system needs investing. And I call this the fuel in the system. I think you had a very good analogy there, Philip, with that beautiful image from the graduates in the National College of Art and Design. But, you know, when the system runs empty, and, you know, we have to connect some of the dots, in my view. So the piece about the equipment, who's looking after the equipment, and our technical support staff are a key part of that engine of our research system, as are our research support staff. So I suppose I'm kind of getting into granularity, but also showing how the system, you can talk at a high level about what the system can do and how it should work, but if we can't connect some of the dots underneath, Orla, in my view, we're not going to realise, I suppose, the overall ambition that can be realised when we work together. The other piece I think it's fundamentally important to consider when we're talking about the funding of the system is how can we do things better together. So Philip and Rebecca mentioned partnership and collaboration. That's quite important as the system has matured. And what does Ireland Inc. need further in the system to really compete globally? And some of that comes down to infrastructure. For example, we can talk about things like high performance computing. What is the next phase of need for the country around that, for example? And if we want to talk about big data, look at big data and health, how are we going to realise that ambition together? And collaboration is really important. And I think there's enough maturity in the system where we can look at the collaborative advantage we can offer by working together much more cohesively. And it's not only with ourselves in the system, it's with our partners in industry, it's with our colleagues in health, it's with our colleagues in the public sector. And again, I think, you know, forever and more we can look at COVID as an example for many, many things, but including how we could show that by that collaborative working together based on disciplines and being, you know, acknowledging the value of what each discipline can bring to a scenario like we had with COVID, but extending that into the mission focus that we will see increasingly from Europe and also from government and from society, we're going to need that collaboration together. So I think we have to consider, Orla, ultimately the system together. We can't be this dichotomizing that what research needs over here and what teaching needs over here. The whole system is one ultimately. It's the academics, who are doing the research, doing the teaching. It's a support system around them that, in those interstitial spaces that really provide the overall glue and ensure that we can realize our ambition together. So many things to consider, but I think we have a good blueprint in Impact 2030 for many of those foundations to be understood and to be, I suppose, properly threaded out to see where we go next with them.
Thanks, Nora-Lee. And Philip, I might jump back to you then on that one, because Nora-Lee has brought up the subject of funding of our system in all sorts of dimensions, right? And a big part of your job is going to be making the case for funding of our research and innovation system. In fact, it's a big part of all of our jobs. Now you mentioned there in your presentation, and I agree with you that there is very strong public and government support for research and innovation in Ireland. And there is. I've never met a politician or a civil servant who doesn't absolutely agree with the importance of these areas. It's a question of where we fall in the priorities compared to all the other priorities of housing and health and pandemics that arrive on their doorstep. So what do we need to do to better make the case, and it's all our jobs, to better make that case for appropriate public funding of research and innovation in Ireland?
Yeah, in a way, kind of, I wish I knew. And if I did, I wouldn't be here. I'd be out there raising the money. No, that's not true. I do know. First of all, I think we have to be confident about it. Secondly, I think we have to be clear. And I think we need to completely rethink what we mean by impact. Unfortunately, that word is now freighted. People think we know what we mean by it, so I'm going to have to kind of stop using it. So we need to think about kind of consequences, our benefits, our returns. And one of the key, talent is something we don't talk about it enough. You have these people in your department, you have these people in your enterprise because of, a research project you invested in 20 years ago, which trained a whole lot of people, and here they are. So I think we need to be confident in those arguments about long-term benefits, about talent, and begin to just get much better at capturing the full range of what we mean by impact. It's impact on people, on our society. Telling those stories better and illustrating, the success that you can see there was bought back there. And you're seeding the success of proximate ones and longer term ones. So just that's one thing, I think, just not underestimating the capacity of the political system and the administrative system to understand and react appropriately to sophisticated arguments. It's not all about the new shiny thing. They do help, but what you're really doing with the new shiny thing is you're taking the easy route. Right? This is easy to show you how important it is. This is harder, but we need to put in the effort collaboratively to the harder thing. And if I can just make a subsidiary point, there's a critical, this is actually to kind of Nora-Lee's point, there's a critical relationship between the Competitive Funding Agency and the HEA. Yeah. This will only work if the core funding agency and the competitive have a common understanding of what is the fuel and the infrastructure required, how are the research careers going to work. And in a way that's part of the case making as well. Yeah. This is a big package which we're going to deliver over 10 years. This is my part in it. This is the HEA's part in it. This is the institution's part. This is the EI's part. So I think we just make the case. It's not rocket science. It's the hard work of teaching. Actually, it's what we're good at. Is talking through complex concepts with people.
And there might be a sense that the pieces are starting to come together around this, with the formation of the new department in particular, and I think people are starting to see exactly, as you say, the parts that everybody has to play in making this happen. And Kevin, of course, a big part of this jigsaw is Europe and European funding and European networks. So can you tell us a bit about what we need to do in Ireland differently or better, to do better in Horizon Europe now than we've done in the past? And I know we've done very, very well, obviously, under Horizon 2020, but are there things that we now need to shift as Europe is shifting? Brexit, of course, changes the landscape. So what should we be doing now?
So there's a lot of different points to the answer. I just want to return to what Rebecca was saying about arts, social sciences and humanities. I mean, I see a big step change in Horizon Europe around the incorporation of arts, social sciences and humanities. A big emphasis has been placed on that. The missions and almost all pillars within Horizon Europe have very strong potential for social sciences, humanities, incorporation, and even leading projects and so on. So I see, because of the nature of the global problems we're trying to solve, the Commission is now really communicating very hard on how important those elements are to create good projects and for projects to lead to good outcomes for citizens, making Europe work for citizens as well as businesses and enterprises and so on. On Horizon Europe, I mean, we're starting from, I think, 2 successive programs where we've done quite well. We've had a strong performance. If I go back to the program before Horizon 2020, Ireland had a net EU contribution of about 627 million, and that's then morphed into about 1.2 billion in Horizon 2020. So there's a lot of things we are doing right in terms of the structure we have here, the National Contact Support System, the role of different NCPs and how they all connect in together, and their presence and involvement in different departments and agencies that make sense. So there's a lot we're doing well on that front. The Commission and the Horizon Europe programme, though, is a moving target. And I'm surprised actually how dynamic it is. It's not static at all. There are lots of new instruments. Effectively, Horizon Europe, the Commission have a toolkit, and they have lots of different ways of making things happen. So you've got Excellent Science, European Research Council, Marie Curie programs, research infrastructures. You've got global challenges, industry competitiveness, all the different clusters, and then you've got Innovative Europe. The Commission are applying all kinds of instruments across the programme, and there's a real thread of cross-cutting in Horizon Europe. It requires much more interdisciplinarity between different parts of the programme. There are multiple entry points for early research, early career research scientists, for small companies, for scale-ups, for established SMEs, for large foreign direct investment type companies, and so on. So the missions, which are one of the big ideas of Horizon Europe. So these are, challenge-based kind of initiatives that are just crossing over Pillar 2 in Horizon Europe. They demand whole of society, whole of government approaches. They're basically connecting to what are the problems the globe is now trying to solve, and it connects directly into UN Sustainable Development Goals and so on. So they're very orientated on the challenge front. And they're looking to achieve the kind of mobilization that Philip talked about in relation to COVID and the pandemic. That's the urgency and the mobilization effect the Commission are trying to achieve across climate adaptation, climate neutral cities, cancer, restoring our oceans and restoring our soil. So that demands of us a whole new way of interacting with the research and innovation system here. It means we have to bring all actors together so that we can mobilize correctly, so that we can really make the most of the opportunities that missions create for us as a society, for enterprises and for higher education institutes and research scientists, NGOs and so on, regions as well as kind of more bigger cities. So the target is moving. It requires more complex stakeholder alignment and coordination, but I think Ireland is well placed. We have, Philip talked about the distance between people and so on, and different actors in the ecosystem. I think that should be to our advantage. We should be able to move quickly as a national research and innovation system. So I'm hoping that will allow us to really do well in that part of the system. I think in other areas we're building on strength. We have a good research commercialization system. We're generating really interesting deep tech spin-out companies. And as a consequence, we're doing quite well in the European Innovation Council Accelerator Programme. We had some very good results just in the last few days. 4 Irish companies in receipt of 23 million in grant plus equity investment. So we are building on strength, but we have more to do in terms of the coordination aspects, particularly as it relates to missions. And the other challenge is helping small companies to navigate to the right parts of the program so that they can participate effectively, because it's still hard for smaller companies to get on the pitch. So that's where the NCPs come in, and there are larger things called partnerships now, which are very large projects, more project partners, and these are constructs where the Commission is trying to achieve certain top-down kind of objectives that can't be achieved through normal kind of collaborative projects. So the target is moving and evolving very quickly in Horizon Europe.
Very good, and that collaboration that you talk about between the system and those of us in the research performing organisations and getting into Europe, I think that nationally we'd love to see really, really good joining up around that. I think there's real potential for us. You're absolutely right.
Yes, yeah, and I mean the research offices are very key stakeholders for us.
Very much so.
They are a big multiplier in how the national support team connects with all parts of a higher education institute so that we get all of the people who should be involved in Horizon Europe on the pitch. And I think we'll continue to drive that relationship with the research offices. And I think how the new technological universities will also be part of that is very important. It's really important, and I think it's referenced in Impact 2030 that the research offices in the new technological universities are resourced adequately so that they can bring their researcher base onto the pitch and competing and putting competitive proposals together.
Very good. Nora Lee, another of the questions I said at the start, there were two questions that came up very often at registration. The other one was about whether we have enough emphasis in our national system on basic or fundamental research. So what do you think, what would you like to see in this regard out of Impact 2030?
Yeah, I think, I definitely share a lot of what Philip has articulated earlier on about what's important in a research ecosystem. And my view is very much that what's needed is a diversity of funding streams and a sense of looking at equity across that and how we can consider. So, emphasising one type of research over the other is, not, I suppose, in my view, what signals a flourishing research ecosystem. I think what we need to consider is what are the instruments that we can have, and what type of research get funded, what's the expectation of that research when it is then funded. So I suppose for me, ensuring that we have instruments like, the IRC Laureate, like the ERC type awards where, it invests in excellent research. And those disciplines, it is less focused on maybe the type of research, but allowing the best research to come to the fore, if that makes sense. So it's not becoming into this conversation of, basic versus applied. It's acknowledging that the whole ecosystem needs the entirety of the research journey, so to speak, to be considered, emphasised and supported. And, that may need different emphasis at different points in time, for example. However, ensuring that we keep a check and balance in the system is important. And I think what I liked really, a number of things in Impact 2030, but particularly the Research and Innovation Advisory Forum, which I felt is an important part of ensuring that the ecosystem continues to consider some of these questions and look at maybe the balance or the emphasis at different points in time, but also considering what's happening, like what Kevin is describing. How are we ensuring the various actors are coming together to ensure we have a flourishing research system? Thinking then as part of that about talent. So, what do people need at early career, mid-career, more later in career? What are the instruments that we can have to ensure that we're constantly investing in research that is underpinned by excellence and will lead us to having the type of outcomes that are desirable. So that is research with impact. And I appreciate what Philip has talked about, that maybe the word impact is nearly over emphasise, maybe less understood or less shared understanding of that. But I think all of us, certainly my view, will be taking a very broad lens on what impact is, but also acknowledging that evidence of impact can happen to varying degrees at various stages of research. And the expectation can't be the same of impact from all types of research all of the time, and we have to, I think, get to a more shared understanding of that. So I suppose, Orla, I'm very conscious of time. It's something we could have a great debate about, but I think for me, very much important that we keep an eye on the importance of a flourishing ecosystem for research, and that conversation that or a direction that brings us very strongly emphasising something over another on a long-term basis won't lead to that overall flourishing ecosystem. So ensuring that we keep an eye on that and a check and balance that, I think is quite important.
Thanks, Norley. And again, look to time, because we do want to give people time to put their questions. I'll just pose one more question here. Maybe, Rebecca, I'll direct this to you. And it's about a word we've heard a lot about here this afternoon, talent. So the formation of talent through research is such an important part of our national system at all levels, from the undergraduates who are educated in a research-informed environment, through the doctoral students, the postdocs, and then those who achieve research positions either in industry or in academia, early, mid and late career. What do you think we need to do better to enhance our formation of talent through research at any or all of those levels?
Thank you. I might kind of go round to a slightly unexpected place here to talk about that one, which is, you know, we tend to think of Ireland as a country with a very large young population, but I think we're getting a bit lazy if that's the way we're thinking about the country, because really pretty soon we're a country with a very large older population. And I think discussions of talent and kind of career trajectories, and, you know, we'll sometimes talk about pipeline, and, you know, there's a sense that universities are training people to go out and do other things, and we think about talent in those terms. And I could answer to that question, but I want to go to the other end and just reflect for a moment on older people and how they might be, you know, they might fit into what we would talk about with talent, because I think that's a huge untapped pool of people, for whom we have universities. Why are we doing research? Why are we kind of trying to curate knowledge and develop new knowledge, if not for the whole of society? And, you know, other cultures put a lot more emphasis on the wisdom of older people, and, you know, people who've gone through wars and traumatic events, and, you know, would have a huge input to make when we're then suddenly saying, how can we deal with the fact that we're all traumatized now? So I would like to see some thinking, some quite, you know, creative thinking going on about how can universities remodel what they're doing to be genuinely accessible to people at all points in their lives. And, you know, sometimes I suppose the thing about the population aging is for the health system, that, you know, there's going to be a huge demand as people get older. If they're not happy, if they're getting kind of lonely, if they're getting, you know, all the sort of the social science observations of aging, turns into a huge bill for the medical system. Perhaps to bring back to, you know, arts and humanities, these are things which provide real comfort to people, which provide real meaning, sense of purpose to people, often when they come to them later in life with all the experience that they've gained. So they have not only fantastic insights to bring to the research that we're doing, the conversations we're having. I still think research is fundamentally a conversation. They have huge amounts to bring to those conversations. And, you know, if we're going to take the sort of the capitalist line to things, it would probably save the health system some money too, because you would actually be tackling some very serious health challenges if we were better at making society work for older people. So.
Okay, that's a great point, and one we don't hear nearly often enough, so thanks, Rebecca. Okay, I'll throw it open now for questions from those of you in the room here or from those online. Cormac Taylor up at the back has his hand up, and we have a roving microphone.
Thanks. Thanks, Orla, and the panel. It's really a lot of fresh air there, which is really great to hear, and I think there's a fabulous opportunity for change right now. There's been a lot of emphasis on talent and the creation of talent, but also the maintenance of talent. And as a researcher at the coalface, as it were, one of the most frustrating and difficult things to deal with over the last 2 decades has been this word impact, because it's changed what it means. And you can get a great grant, do everything you were supposed to do everything you said you were going to do, come back for a renewal, and it turns out that you're now supposed to do something completely different, and the goalposts have changed. So I think that the introduction of a consistent system whereby, you know, you can be confident that the next grant won't be more of a random sort of event, than it will be more based on a consistent understanding of what impact actually is. And I totally agree with the point that different types of research have different types of impact, and we need to be a bit more understanding about how we measure that. But it was great panel discussion and great fresh air, and pieces falling into place too. So thank you.
And I think implicit in what you said there as well, Cormac, of course, is that if you want to again just use the kind of an economic view of it, just a waste in our system where you have brilliant people who are funded to a point and then aren't funded. And we've all this brilliant capacity in our system that is not being tapped. So, you know, anybody want to pick up on what Cormac said there, Norley?
think it's a very valuable point, and I think there's something about connecting the dots, looking at the system as totality and leveraging what's there, and I suppose ensuring longevity in the thinking. And I think that's where the opportunity presents right now in what we have in Impact 2030 and with funding for the future, is to connect a lot more in a long-term way, so you don't have this kind of fall off a shelf approach where something changed after a couple of years, all that's lost. How do we continue to build and get resilience in the system and take a sustainable long-term approach to what we do? So I would support that. Where we can have those conversations, I think, to pick up Rebecca's point about conversations, I think if today is highlighting the importance of more of that in the ecosystem, and the forum which we can do that is going to be quite important.
Thanks very much. We'll take another question. Oh, sorry, did you want to come in?
I was going to say, I mean, not all research scientists are going to end up as full-time academics, right? So there's very, very multiple career pathways.
Yeah.
And this is why industry collaboration is so important. We see it in our tech centres, through our innovation partnership program, through our Marie Curie co-fund. You get that knowledge transfer, people start working with companies, and they end up getting hired by the company. So you're starting to create, I guess, a differentiated CV, which gives you what I would call career optionality. It'll still be useful to you if you end up in full-time academia, because you may be wanting to mix maybe more basic research with applied, and you'll have the vocabulary and language around some of that, and also the knowledge. But also, you may want to go into other career paths, and I think that career optionality is one of the spillovers from kind of industry collaboration across our centres and programs.
Yeah, very much so. Yes.
Maura Heine from the Health Research Board. I really welcome the combination of Science Foundation Ireland and IRC. I think that's going to introduce some lovely balance, but of course it isn't going to be the only agency in Ireland. Yeah. It is not the one agency, unlike UKRI. There are the sectoral driven agencies such as the Health Research Board and so on. And I suppose my concern would be that there is a danger of marginalisation of the importance of those sectoral driven research funders. So I suppose the question for you, Philip, is how do you see the sort of the whole, ensuring that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and that we really benefit from these many different perspectives on research?
So that was kind of the very last point I made, is that whole of government approaches are optimal in print and difficult in practice. So the only way I can see that working is if that steering group across the 5 big spend, because there's not only is there potential for marginalization, there's also the reality of duplication or missed collaboration, if I can put it that way, with DAFM, with climate, and with health. So I think the real thing is a push behind the unfortunate Assistant Secretaries General or Secretaries General who will be on that group to say, you're here to steer, and that means we need to get down into the nuts and bolts about who's funding what and why and how. Even down to the trivial thing, but why do we have different grant terms and conditions? Do we really need that? Those are the kinds of things that we should be pushing that steering group to say it's explicit or implicit in your strategy. Let's get it done and authorise or instruct to do it as appropriate.
And let me throw in call calendars as well there from the perspective of those of us within research offices. There's another question within the auditorium, and then I'll go to Lisa to see some of the questions coming in online.
Thank you very much. There are 2 aspects, I think, of Impact 2030 which haven't come out in the discussion, but I think were implicit. One of them is the idea of setting up an advisory forum on research and innovation. And in case people don't know, there were policy advisory councils right up to 2014, right from the 1960s. So I'm not saying that exactly the same institution should be reconstituted, but something like that is definitely necessary to get the wider view. For example, there's been no mention of the views of industry in today's discussion, but these policy advisory groups up to as I say 2014 always had a strong industrial view as well as an academic and public sector view. So I think there's a model there that needs to be looked at definitely. All it says in the Impact 2030 is that this will be reviewed it doesn't actually spell out, but I think we need to push for something really important here. Just without taking up too much time, one of the things that's seen to be a role in the paper for this advisory forum is the idea of undertaking foresight exercises. Now, that is something that I think is absolutely key. If you actually listen to all the papers, there's a need for an overarching foresight as to where the country is going, where policy is going. I know we have policy papers, but we need a lot of guidance and a lot of inputs. And it has to come again from experts as well as the general public. It can't be one or the other. So I think we need this kind of broader foresight exercise. And we have a lot of these constitutional and people's conventions going on and various, and that's a model that could be used again for the foresight. Maybe a lot of subgroups like that could make important inputs to the future. Just on that point, I'm working with some people here in UCD at the moment on the idea of a futures thinking event in October. And what we've discovered is that there's an incredible amount of research going on in all of the universities on what could be called futures thinking, and a lot of expertise, and that has to be should be drawn together and utilised much more. So I'd like to get some responses if people have any responses.
I think we'll take your point. I'd say there is unanimous agreement that the role of the advisory forum is going to be absolutely key. I'm a little bit conscious of time, so I'll move on, but I presume everybody's nodding along vigorously to that. So thank you very much. Lisa.
Thanks, Orla. A number of questions coming in, but first of all, just a lot of support also for Cormac's comments with regard to the continuity of funding and the need for that. And then Donal Leach also coming in on the chat here about the possibility of developing a funding programme that supports academic researchers throughout the life cycle and how important that is for the continuity. So I just thought I'd give that a mention. Also, the other items that are coming in quite strongly are around the demonstrating the value and building the case for investment in research, but specifically if you're looking at the AHSS, and there's a lot of talk about them being interdisciplinary and the value there, but how do you get the funding with regard to AHSS for the individual disciplines within that and demonstrate the value of those? So that's one of the questions we have here.
Okay, thanks very much. Anybody want to comment on that?
Well, I think there's certainly direct funding for AHSS within Horizon Europe under Pillar 2, Culture, Creativity and Inclusive Society, but also across the other pillars as well. Just on the point made before now, there is a much more defined horizon scanning activity within Enterprise Ireland now, which is joining up with the IDA and across agencies. So there is a more joined up horizon scanning activity within the agencies now, and that's reflected in various documents, including our own recently published 3-year strategy, Leading in a Changing World. And also we're very conscious of representing the needs of industry and SMEs in relation to the research and innovation system and making sure that there's multiple entry points for different kinds of companies to engage with and extract value and exchange value with the research and innovation system. So there's a lot of activity within Enterprise Ireland on industry academic collaboration and deriving kind of value and outcomes from that.
We're very close to being at time, but there's a few more questions. So if I can impose on people for 5 extra minutes, the link isn't going to blow up or anything, is it, if we take 5 more minutes? Okay, we'll do our best. So yeah. Oh, loads of hands going up, a forest of hands. Yes, yeah, not like a far ahead.
Sorry. First of all, Donnacha Driscoll from Insight here in UCD. It's very refreshing to hear this discussion, and Insight is a centre associated with 8 schools, so cross-disciplinary and that approach, all very positive. So I want to start off with a positive before I ask the negative. And it's just that I did my PhD here back in the 80s. I remember actually our lab having to close 2 months early one of the years because there just was no money. It just dried up. So I fully appreciate how far we've come. But one debate that's been there for the last 30 years is getting back to the basics, and something actually that Kevin said about the career opportunities and choices for researchers. They're actually quite poor and don't really exist in a sense outside of the teaching at third level. The reason why I say that is that at the moment, all this strategy is based on the people that we have, the postdocs, the PhD, the senior researchers. And for instance, in Insight, apart from obviously the very talented investigators, I'm sitting beside my CEO here, everybody is on short-term contracts. And I know it's the nature of the beast and the research, but there has never been a proper addressing of this. Well, if you want to have a career in research, which isn't necessarily part of and again, teaching, very important. I keep substating these, but there is no career opportunity. There is, like I did my PhD here, but I'm in the research side of it in my late 50s now. I've never had a full-time contract. That's grand, we get on with it, but it's coming back to bite us right now, because what happens is that it becomes the poorer option for people when considering careers, and it's almost impossible to get a lot of postdoc roles filled, to get various things done. And part of that is that there's a vague career. Of course, there's a lot of opportunities, but no one body or bodies have got together to say, how can we actually develop it? There's been patchwork. But we don't have a career structure as such that is purely research-based, unless you go into academia and teaching, which it's a credible part, or you go into industry. Otherwise, you're a journey person. And I get it. It's part of the nature of the beast, but it's something which has never been addressed, and it's not addressed now. But I think it's a bottleneck. Sorry.
And I'll just add to that, Philip, just for noting, stipends for PhDs, salaries for postdocs, real problems for us at the moment, particularly in a city like Dublin, but I'm sure all around the country as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you don't mind, I do want to comment on that, and I broadened that out into the doctoral experience. I was giving you a list of things there that require attention, in my view, so I'm supportive both of Cormac's comments and yours. They're quite different. I mean, what we're talking about here, and Norley, if you don't mind, kind of refer to you, and I don't take offence, as infrastructure. And we do have to, that is one form of research career. It's the person who their entire career is going to be in a research centre, perhaps. And let's be blunt, they're new, and we have failed to structure how that's going to operate, completely upfront. Cormac, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And to a certain extent, we're collectively caught in this cycle of short-termism. What's the thing that we think we can sell now, honestly, to the political and administrative system? We'll do that, and it means that we're doing something different in 3 years' time. This strategy is an opportunity to say, what do we want to do consistently? And I didn't get a chance to say it, but we talk about ecosystems and never stop to consider what it means. You don't over-engineer an ecosystem. You don't landscape it. You nourish it. You do things that are simple and sustained and mutually reinforcing. And I think that's what you're asking for. And I think they're both logic. I think we should have the confidence to say, this is where we're going in the long term. So what are we going to do to support that journey, rather than this is where we're going tomorrow and we'll worry about the day after tomorrow. As I say, the fact that this looks to 2030, that it sets up those challenges, either implicitly or explicitly, is an opportunity for us to say, right, we'll do that now with a long-term view. And then finally, the research advisory structure also came through the public consultation process. So the public have this sense of, we need somebody there to keep us focused, and if you don't mind me saying, honest. So as the head of a research agency, I fully support the notion that there will be somebody out there saying, are they doing the right thing at all? That's an important challenge, I think, an important part of the governance of the system.
Now we just have time for one more question. Ronan McNulty there has had his hand up for a while, so I might give the last question to Ronan, and then I'll ask our panellists for a one-sentence kind of sum up, and then Philip, I'll give you the very last word.
So I remember in 2012, actually, Philip, in Maynooth, you gave a very insightful and eloquent introduction to a public talk at the time by Sir Peter Higgs, who had just won the Nobel Prize, and you had over 1,000 people trying to get into an auditorium in Maynooth, and they couldn't, and you would overflow. But you said a lot of very deep and prescient things there, which have come back. It's the same thing you're talking about today. But there's probably no, I mean, the physics that he was involved in, what he did with the Nobel Prize is a perfect example with the discovery of the Higgs boson at CERN of science right on the frontier, multidisciplinary, international, strongly collaborative, the biggest scientific project in the world. And so I have a question for you, both in the general sense, how does Ireland as a small nation on the periphery of Europe get involved in international projects like that and punch above its weight? And in the particular, why isn't Ireland a member of this organisation? We're the only state in Europe which is not a member. And those 1,000 kids that were being inspired, if they wanted to fulfil that dream, they had to leave Ireland.
I'm going to pass on that question. I mean, I honestly, you know, it's a national policy question. I'll have my voice in that conversation when that conversation is to be had, but it's not something that SFI makes the decision on, and I don't want to prejudge the decision-making process. But I do think there's a fundamental point that we have to think about in relation to, let's take a completely different thing like quantum computing, for instance. You know, we have to be honest with ourselves about what is our capacity as a nation, and therefore what should we focus on. I'm not saying don't join CERN, and I'm not saying don't build a quantum computer. I'm saying when we collectively sit down to say what is the right kind of activity to fund, to nurture that talent, to create the opportunity for them to operate internationally if they need to operate. We're not going to have all of the infrastructure on this island ever. What do we buy into? So fundamentally, those things for me are questions that we need to ask collectively. What is it that we should invest in here to support teaching and talent here, and then connect it appropriately internationally? And sometimes we'd have to prioritize, and we can't have all of the things that we might want. But even in saying that, I'm not coming down on one side or the other of that specific decision, because that's an ongoing discussion that we have to have, really.
Okay, so listen, thanks so much for the, okay, sorry, there's one more question. Yeah.
So I'll keep it to 30 seconds. It's Aisling Dolan here, member of Shannon Erin and the Education Committee. Just to say thank you very much for hosting this session, to Professor Nolan and Professor Feely as well. And to Kevin from Enterprise Ireland, and to both our professors here representing, I know, many different research fields. Just very important, it was very good to hear the comments that have been made and the feedback that's been given here on the new strategy that's coming forward, and also on the new Department of Further and Higher Education. And I know my colleague Minister Simon Harris has been doing a lot in this area. In our committee, it covers education, both primary, secondary, but of course now third level. And we need to get more and more representatives in representing the third level sector. So I do think that that's something that we can work with on our committees as well. Just very crucial that impact above all is crucial. For us to fight for funding at every single level means that in our society, communication is crucial. We had the Creating Our Future roadshow that went around Ireland, and I'm sure into every single county, and I'm sure many of our centres of excellence, all of our researchers here, our PIs were out, I'm sure, in every single town promoting that in our schools. That is absolutely crucial. When we see that happening, we're lowering the walls, those mythical walls that exist around our universities and our third level institutions. Those have to be dragged down. We need to make sure that we're out there. A few days ago, I was in a mart. I was in the ring in the mart in Roscommon, talking with IFA. We should be talking about all of the the funding, the partnerships that have been done through the likes of SFI with Teagasc, through the likes of engaging with the other funding groups. I would have worked in the research offices in NUI Galway. I would have known about the funding coming through EPA, SEAI, DAFM, along with our major funders like Health Research Board and of course our Irish Research Council, because that funding was so crucial, particularly for the postdocs, for the PhDs, for bringing people from that third level degree and further on. The funding that we draw down, the Just Retour, the non-exchequer funding is going to be crucial. Horizon Europe, how we're building our multidisciplinary partnerships, all of these things we need to promote and highlight. All of these things in every single media, be it TV, radio, etc., but also through our forums in the committee. And I welcome, I suppose, hoping to work with you to do that, to see how we can promote that more. But I just want to thank you because, very simply, the evidence of the vaccine take-up is pure confidence in our science. And that has been down to the researchers across the country over the last 10, 15 years. It's been down to the funding and promotion programs that you've done in schools, in primary schools, secondary schools, that's delivered that for us in Ireland. And that's thanks to the innovation, to the research, and that's been done by our researchers. So Gurmil Magath, and thank you.
And thank you very much, and that's a wonderful contribution to have, and I think it's so important. And I do have a sense of optimism that I think we can work more closely now with the political system. I think that everybody in all the various parts of our ecosystem understands different perspectives, understands what we need collectively to deliver for Ireland and for the world. So look, I'm optimistic. I think that this is a very good strategy. I think that we can do great things within it. And I think, again, as you say there, Aisling, thank you so much for being here, that engagement with the political system is absolutely crucial as part of this, and we really look forward to engaging with you on that. With apologies again for going over, I'll give the panellists one sentence each, except Philip, you get a few more sentences because you're a keynote speaker. I'll finish with you. So Kevin, what would you really like to see come out of Impact 2030?
A Proustian sentence. So Impact 2030, I think, provides a very good blueprint for all of the agencies, all of the departments to make progress. Horizon Europe is at a relatively early stage. There are multiple entry points for early career scientists, small companies, large scaling companies, large foreign direct investment, citizens, multidisciplinary teams across higher education institutes. Go and talk to your research office, go and talk to the relevant national contact point. There is multiple opportunities for people, and there are people who can help you connect with the relevant parts of the system here and internationally. I think overall, the investments we make in the national research and innovation system here show benefit when we go and compete in Horizon Europe, and vice versa. I think there's a nice bilateral synergy now between our system here and how we do in Horizon Europe, and vice versa. We no longer have that kind of over-dependency on Horizon or framework programs to subsidize a totally unfunded system here. We're now competing, I think, a lot better than we used to, and I think that's a reflection of the maturity of the system we have now.
Thanks, Kevin. Not fully sure that was one sentence, but thank you. Norley?
There was a comma in there. So.
I'll stick to one because we've taxied you soon. I think for me the opportunity presents now to all of us to work collaboratively to really take advantage of what's in the system, but absolutely to make sure that we deliver on a system that acknowledges what's needed to get into the granularity of really getting to understand what we need for a sustainable research system that involves all the actors, including our colleagues in the political system and the public, and the opportunity presents in Impact 2030. And I would just love to see it realised, its ambitions by 2030.
Great. Rebecca?
One of our audience members talked about futures and horizon scanning. There's a golden rule when you're doing futures work that however far into the future you want to go, you have to go twice as far back into the past. Philip, you passed the test, you went 10 years into the future and you look back over 20 years, so we'll tick on that one. But I think we can be a bit more ambitious for what we hope for this, in as much as that's really a way of saying you have to have a full understanding of the whole culture and society that our future hopes are coming from to succeed. So thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. And Philip?
Very briefly, because I think we've addressed kind of instrumental points, but I want to draw something that Rebecca said earlier that struck me very deeply, and what the Senator said. I think we all face this challenge of making our work visible and tangible. It's not a humanities and social science. Science is, So the one thing that we risk missing, that we risk failing to do, the principal thing we risk failing to do, is to take the time and energy to engage fully with the public and the administrative and the political system, and confidently and passionately put the shiny stuff to one side and say, this is what I do, this is why, and these are the benefits that I hope it generates for society. And people are compelled by those stories because they're compelling stories. And I think that of all of the things that I've kind of learned today, that's the one that I worry most about actually delivering for lots of reasons. We're busy, we worry that we won't do it, we'd say that's not what they want to hear, so I'll tell them something different. So that's the one big thing for me, that the public wants to invest in what we do because they see the benefits, but we need to keep up that conversation over the next decade to ensure they understand what they're getting for it and have the opportunity to say, actually, that's not what we wanted. We're worried about this and you're not. And that the Creating Our Future thing really showed us that the public is ahead of us. The public is ahead of us. We're just not confident enough to be where they are, actually.
Okay, so we look forward to that outcome, Philip. Yeah, very soon. Yes. So again, apologies for running over, but I think it was a great discussion. Thanks so much to all of you for being here, both online and in the room. I think it was a really important discussion at a very crucial time for us in our national evolution in research and innovation. Thanks to the IUA, of course, for organising. And the next Future of Ireland event will take place in the autumn, so you can look out for that. Thanks again. Bye-bye.